Christian business owners, Christian business leaders, I want to throw this out to you to consider. Your goal in every area that you operate in your business and as a disciple of Jesus is perfection. Your goal is to be perfect. Jesus says this. He says it in Matthew chapter 10, 24 and Luke 6:40. He says, the goal of a disciple, the goal of a servant is to be like their master. Our goal is to be like our master. Here is our goal, Jesus. Jesus is perfect. Here we are, right here. We will never be perfect. I understand that. I will never get to perfection. My goal, I am striving to be like Jesus. Not to be Jesus, but to be like Jesus. And my goal is to be like Jesus. And I know I will never reach it. So there's a gap between the perfect Brad as a business owner, the perfect Brad as a disciple of Jesus, the perfect Brad as simply a person. I know that. And there's a gap between me and that. And so my goal every day, and then every week, and then every month, which is made up of days and weeks, right? My goal is to close that gap. To close that gap between where I am and perfection every day. Knowing I will never get there, but it's an exciting journey. I have found it such an exciting journey to be working on that, to improving myself as a business owner, improving myself as a person, improving myself as a disciple of Jesus, to get closer to that perfection. And you know what? Some days I close that gap quite a bit. Some days I close that gap just a little bit. Some days, not only do I not close that gap, I make that gap wider because I just had a really bad day. But the goal, the objective here is for you, for me. This is how I think of myself. Okay, how I think of it myself. Okay, I had a bad day yesterday. I've had 2 bad days in a row. I have widened the gap between perfection and where Brad is. That's okay. This is a long game. This is a long-term game. So my objective and what I want to challenge you with and encourage you with is the objective is to string a lot more days of closing the gap together than I do string days where I am widening the gap. And over time, if you continue to have a lot more days of closing the gap than you do widening the gap, you are making progress. I don't care if it's 1% a day that you're closing that gap. You're closing the gap. You're becoming closer to the perfect you. That's what we want to shoot for. Because I firmly believe this, that we are missing out as disciples of Jesus, operating in our business as a disciple of Jesus, operating our business the way Jesus wants us to operate his business that he owns, that he's letting us manage for him. Operating our business that way, if we would do that, we would have such amazing experiences every day with Jesus, realizing that he's letting us be part of what he's doing and impacting people's lives. But many times we're afraid, and you hear this a lot amongst the Christian community. You hear, well, I know I'll never be perfect. I'm just going to rest on grace or God's mercy. But I think that allows us to stay where we are and not continue to push and strive to continue to reduce that gap between where we are and being perfect. And by allowing yourself to use that as an excuse or a reason to not push because you'll never get to perfect, you are missing out on a lot of amazing experiences in your life. And I speak on that from experience in my own life. When I have the most amazing days, when I have the most exciting days, when I have the most fulfilling days, when I have the most contentment and satisfaction in the evenings about my day, it is when I am working to close that gap. And the best way I found to start in closing that gap is to obey Jesus. When I know Jesus is telling me to do something, and sometimes it's stuff that I know that he's told me, it's in the Bible, which is one way he's telling me, I know I'm not obeying that. Other times I know he's told me stuff that I should be doing that I have just put off, normally because it makes me uncomfortable or I don't want to do it or it conflicts with what Brad wants to do. You've probably been there, right? When I begin to do those things, and then during the day when I hear him speak to me and say, Brad, do this, say that, talk to this person, and I go do that immediately, even though I have no idea what the outcome is going to be, I am just trying to obey Jesus. And by obedience is the fastest way that we close this gap, because that's when Jesus that's when Jesus shows us more of who he is. And I get that from the Bible in John 14:21-24. Jesus says, if you love me, you will do what I say. And if you do what I say, the Father and I will come to you, and we will manifest ourselves to you. In other words, Jesus is saying, if you love me, you'll obey me. And it's through the obedience that you will actually see more of me in your life. So I want more of Jesus in my life. So I try to continue to push myself to obey Jesus, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I don't see how it's going to turn out. Because through that, I am closing the gap between where Brad is and the perfect Brad. The perfect Brad as a disciple of Jesus. The perfect Brad as a husband. The perfect Brad as a father. The perfect Brad as a business owner. That's what I want to encourage you. Work on closing that gap every day between who you are and the perfect you. Knowing you'll never get there, but don't be satisfied that you're not there. And I call it being joyfully discontent. Being joyful about where you are on your journey to this point with Jesus, but being discontent with staying where you are because you're not to that perfection yet. And I have found this journey, this quest to go after the perfect Brad of what can be, and keeping a vision, a clear vision in my head of what it looks like to live fully in the kingdom of God. And that's the vision of perfection, perfectly living in the kingdom of God, because Jesus showed us how to live perfectly in the kingdom of God on this earth. That's what I'm striving for. That's what I'm shooting for. That's the carrot I keep out in front of me that keeps me motivated and excited to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing Brad and pushing Brad and pushing Brad and pushing Brad to do that. And yeah, some days I have some really bad days because Brad got in the middle of it and Brad just messed it up. And sometimes it turns into weeks. I feel like it's a whole week of days that I've strung together. But you just got to get this, speaking from experience. You just got to get back on the horse and say, okay, today that stops. Today I'm not going to do another day of widening the gap. Today I'm going to start closing that gap again. And when you string more days together than you did of closing the gap than you do of widening the gap, over the long term, you're winning. So I just want to encourage you with that. Go out today. Listen to Jesus. Take risks for him. Do to the best of your understanding, do what you think Jesus is wanting you to do, and trust him with the results. And what I've found is people say, well, how do you know when it's Jesus? Normally, it's when it makes me uncomfortable and it's not something that I would naturally do on my own. Hey, just want to encourage you with that. Hope you're having a great day. And until all here, let's keep pushing to be the perfect disciple of Jesus.